Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Washington. And on Monday, the stock exchanges around the world melted. In New York, apparently $1 trillion of value was lost on paper. And if you listen to the journalists talking on CNN and some of the other networks, it's all about the S&P downgrading of American sovereign debt. But if you listen to the people actually in the markets, it really wasn't about that at all. In fact, what did people do on Monday? They bought more American Treasury bills, is what everyone thinks is the only real safe haven in all this turmoil. But then if it isn't really about S&P, then what is it about? Now joining us to help unpack this is Tom Ferguson. Tom teaches at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He's also a senior fellow at the Roosevelt Institute in New York. And thank you for joining us again, Tom.
Hi there.
So first of all, why did the crash take place on Monday, given that nobody takes what S&P did very seriously?
Well, I mean, S&P has maybe made some confusion in outside the United States. It can't be news to most people inside the United States that the president and the congressional parties are often at odds. You know, that's just all there is to it. Bottom line on this is you've had effectively 3 years of austerity economics. And it's been, you could see this especially from the Toronto summit of last year when the G20 got completely out of recovery mode. For some reason decided that prosperity was just around the corner and decided they would effectively rein in central bank efforts to stimulate the economy and all forms of state spending. And they've, we've talked about this before. The Obama administration signed on to this nonsense. And so effectively what you've got now is just about every economy in the world except the Chinese contracting. And every large economy. The Chinese pull up some of the smaller countries in the world, and they can pull up commodity prices, but even they look like they're cooling off. But in the United States, it's clear that the economy is dead in the water, and that was before the big stock market declines of last week, which of course predated the S&P downgrade. Even though a smart person could see that might be coming, although the Treasury professed to be completely amazed. That's another puzzle in itself, by the way. But basically, the euro crisis and the slowdown in the U.S. are driving the world economy down. That's what this story is about. All these folks who told you over and over that there were, recovery was on the way. They told you that, in 2009. They told you this in 2010. And they told you this year. It's not happening, all right? That's the basic reason the bottom's falling out of the world economy.
So what can be done? Because if you listen again to the pundits on TV all Monday, over and over again we kept hearing, well, they've got nothing left in their tool case. The Fed has done what they could do, and that there's nothing left for them to do. This is essentially the message today.
The basic issue here is what it was right when you interviewed me at the time Obama took office. That is to say, you just had a giant financial crash that leads almost everybody who can to hoard, save. Nobody wants to lay cash out. You get a kind of balance sheet recession, in Richard Kuh's great phrase, which means that everybody just tries to deleverage because they bought all this stuff on the upswing that's declined in value. And the assets aren't worth much anymore, but boy, the debts are still pressing. And so everybody cuts back. In that circumstance, there is no way forward except for governments. With everybody else cutting back, they've got to borrow and spend. Now, if you don't like them sort of adding to the deficit, you have a very simple way forward, the so-called balanced budget multiplier, where you simply borrow just as much as you're spending, so you don't add to your deficit if you're really that concerned about it, which I frankly think at moments like this is crazy. But if you're really that nervous about it, you can just borrow a lot, spend it. That will actually increase net spending. Because people will also bring money out of savings to spend. I mean, that result's been a sort of standard item in economic theory since the mid-1940s, at least. And that's what has to happen now. I mean, I heard just a few hours ago about some U.S. senators telling folks I knew, well, we're going to start talking about jobs. You know, it's a bit late to be talking about jobs, and we were sure that this would really happen. Why? Because Chuck Schumer was now going to direct the rhetoric. Doesn't that really inspire you with confidence? This is on the Democratic side. And then, you know, what I heard trotted out was, well, an infrastructure bank. An infrastructure bank's a good idea. But, you know, let's face it. An infrastructure bank isn't up to the problem. You need a really big program, and it's kind of crazy to do what some people are suggesting. Well, let's have the governors offer little prizes or something for good ideas. State and local spending is overall falling. You're losing jobs from that. That was evident even in the most recent unemployment report.
Actually, you know, that's something that's not getting talked about very much today. Like, one of the things that's happening in all this TV punditry is that Treasury bills are being bought. The Fed can, you know, essentially can always pay down its own debts because it can print money. But none of that applies to states and municipalities.
That's right.
That are already starved and are going to be paying more interest on their bonds. I mean, and that's what, in terms of programs, that's what affects ordinary people the most. I mean, well, states and cities are going to get screwed here.
Paul, it's also very important to note that when you do many federal programs, the reach comes through the states. That is to say, like education mostly comes through the states. If the federal money may be routed through the states, but the states actually handle the administration, whatever you're actually going to get, and you're wrecking the state capacity to even channel the federal money. I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not arguing if you just sort of save states and localities that you'll fix the problem. That's not what I'm telling you at all. It's that you really need now to target unemployment. You need to do what Roosevelt did in the New Deal. You need to sort of put a massive set of public works, WPA, civilian, anything you want, all of that stuff works. We know it works. You know, you shouldn't have to keep pointing to Roosevelt and then horribly Hitler as examples of successful policy making in this situation. But given the lunacy that now dominates Washington in both parties about where the deficit is supposed to be your big problem, and in Western Europe where cut in France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Britain, they've all seized this. I mean, it's time to stand up and say, look, we know how this stuff works. It's worked before. It can work again. If the notion that just cutting your deficit and going back to the economics of Herbert Hoover, which, you know, one must say is Tea Party economics, right, in the end, will get you out of this is crazy.
But moreover, isn't part of what's being missed here?
You're going down, down, down. I mean, you're in a real downward spiral now. I'm sorry.
Tom, isn't part of what's going on here is not just some dogma that people don't want to give up or some extreme ideology and all of this. It's that there's a kind of, to quote a recent interview I did, a kind of financial terrorism taking place. In other words, there are big groups of capital making a lot of money out of the volatility. When the market goes down and they're sitting on a lot of cash, even if they take a hit in their own stocks, they're buying back in and they're picking up bargain basement. They're forcing states and municipalities into selling off publicly owned works and, you know, bridge and roads. And in Greece, they're getting people to sell off islands. I mean, isn't that there's actually people profiting through creating this extreme crisis?
Okay, look, you know, what's that line in Gone with the Wind where you can make as much money off a declining empire as you can off a rising one? I have to say, hey, I've never even seen the movie through, and I confess I never read the whole book, but that line I recall. Anyway, yeah, there's some of that, but fundamentally, no. I mean, the macro politics of this, if you ask me, are about financial conservatism, where a lot of banks and financial folks think that they're in something like a zero-sum competition. That is to say, if you stimulate the economy and add to public indebtedness, then they runs the argument, the political opposition, and some people have an economic theory on that, then there's not enough there to save banks. And banks, I will guarantee you, in both the United States and Western Europe tonight, are really thinking about what it might take to save them. I mean, there's some excellent papers. One off, I think it's the World Bank, and there are others that sort of show how some from about 2007 on, when governments announced general reflation programs, bank stocks would fall. Now, those countries didn't include the U.S. in the sample, but frankly, I think it's clear that the U.S. policymaking is governed by the same logic. It's very clear. I mean, Trichet has, in the governor of the European Central Bank, has said virtually that in recent days, that there's no more room for fiscal stimulus because you have of any type, including maybe banks, and that's just to get the economics backward. You have to get growth first in order to get any reduction of indebtedness, in order to pay off debts, cut spending. You've got to get growth.
So the short of it is, you're saying there needs to be a massive jobs program. And do you pay through it through debt, or do you start taxing the wealthy?
Well,
or both?
I would strongly favor immediate repeal of the Bush tax cuts on the top 1%. I see no reason. You don't need that, but that by itself, some people, the sort of silly argument put forward last December, when incidentally you'll notice that S&P managed somehow to just sleep through those tax cuts, which any idiot could see would, if you were really worried about the U.S. fiscal position in the short run, you couldn't possibly not notice that. Where was S&P? The cynical character of this just strikes me as so it's just a political statement. They'd rather hit the poor with cuts, but they don't speak out against tax cuts for the rich. Anyway, you could, I would raise some taxes immediately, and I would spend it all. The main thing is to get aggregate demand up. It's just classic Keynesianism. I'm sorry, that's what it's going to take to get out of this. If you don't do that, you will just go down, down, down. You really are at the very sort of plates of the world are buckling now.
Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.